sensitized community members, we respectfully ask you to keep your mask on for the duration of the program. If you have any questions, you may write them down on the slips you received. Please hand them over to my colleagues. Alternatively, you can email your questions to aoc.townhall@mail.house.gov or call 718-662-5970. For today's town hall, the Congresswoman will discuss the Green New Deal and all the advancements we have made towards climate justice since the time we introduced our historic resolution. We will then open it up for a Q&A from constituents. Please keep your questions limited to 1 minute to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. For any questions we can't address, our staff will be available afterwards to assist. I would now like to invite Deputy Majority Leader, State Senator Michael Jamaris, who represents New York's 12th Senate District, to address the audience.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to take a few minutes because this is not my show. We're here to see and hear from our member of Congress. But I do want to say that she continues to impress in every turn. Obviously, someone who gets a tremendous amount of attention, which is to our benefit ultimately. But it's this work that I appreciate that she never forgets and never lets go of. She is a true representative for her district in addition to being a national leader. And so we appreciate everyone who came out to hear from her today and get your questions answered. The other thing I would say, since we are here talking about the Green New Deal, is her promotion of this issue has affected more than you can even understand. Here in New York, we have now passed what's known as the CLCPA, which puts New York State on track to zero fossil fuel emissions. It was one of our banner achievements when we first took the Senate majority in 2019, and we have work to do to get it implemented, but we have started the process, and we do take inspiration from what's happening in the national conversation, which our member of Congress has been leading. So, as always, my office continues to be here and represent all of you. If there's any questions you have or follow-up that's related to state government, please reach out to us. We're always available. The office is right down 30th Avenue off of Newtown, and let us know what you need. And thank you, Congressmember.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here again. I've got to speak to get somewhere else, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to give you my greetings and let you know we're here to help if you need us. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Senator Bernard. I would now like to invite the representative for New York's 14th Congressional District, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Whew. Hello. Hi, everybody. How's it going today? Good. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm really, really excited, as was mentioned. This is our second full in-person town hall. Well, actually, I should say it's also hybrid. We've got some folks joining online. Hello, everybody. As I've mentioned, and as we've said from the very beginning, it's always been our commitment to have at least one town hall per month. And during the pandemic, we were able to remain true to that. But we had to go online. And now that we're transitioning our town halls back to being in person as well as online, we've been able to incorporate a lot of the lessons learned around accessibility and a lot of other aspects that we learned in going remote too. So our town halls continued, when they are streamed online, to be live translated in 5 different languages in order to serve all the members of our community, as well as closed caption and wherever and whenever possible ASL interpretation as well. And so we're really excited, but again, this is our second town hall. And as Mabel mentioned, who very generously opened us up today, we're going to be talking about the Green New Deal this week, and I wanted to provide you all an update on our progress on the Green New Deal, both on a macro and a micro level. the impact that we've been able to, and the progress we've been able to have both nationally, but also locally, right in our backyard. Because it is Earth Week and Earth Day coming up next week, and we figured that'd be a great theme to give you all an update on. Then at the end, we'll, as always, open it up to Q&A for the entire community. So let's get to it. So basically, we'll be talking about, just briefly, some of the states that we're talking about with the climate crisis, especially locally. The Green New Deal for cities and states, our progress on that, and some victories that we've had in community projects and climate justice right here in Astoria, and then we'll have the Q&A. So we'll move on to our next slide and jump right into it. Now, let me see. Can we get is there a clicker here? Okay. All right, here we go. So right now, and I think a lot of us have seen a lot of the information about really what we're contending with the climate crisis. So I'm not trying to dive too deep into the doom and gloom right now, because really at the core of what we propose with the Green New Deal is to actually not succumb to the dystopia and not succumb to the cynicism that this is just going to happen to us and there's nothing we can do about it. There is something that we can do about it, and there will always be something that we can do about it. And at any juncture, if there is an action that we can take to draw down our emissions and preserve our future, we should be taking it no matter what. That said, emissions are currently projected to rise. We're still not meeting the scientific consensus of not even reducing emissions worldwide, but we're not even plateauing them right now. So they're continuing to project it to rise, leading to a median goal of global warming of up to 3.2 degrees Celsius by 2100, and some of the higher estimates have that at 4 degrees Celsius. What does that mean? That's a lot of numbers. But at 4 degrees Celsius, half of the Earth's landmass would be inhabitable to human life. That's what that means. And that is if we choose to do nothing. So that's why what we have to do right now, and our responsibility, is to dramatically change and dramatically alter the way that our economy is dependent on fossil fuels, and to transition that into an opportunity. Now, the good news is that transitioning our energy sources is a big job, and it's going to put millions of people to work. It can put millions of us to work in order to transition to a zero-emission economy and a drawdown economy. So that's the opportunity that's there. But what does this mean for Queens and the Bronx specifically? What does this mean for us? Queens right now, geographically, is the borough with the most land area at risk of future coastal flooding due to sea level rise. The Bronx has higher elevations, Brooklyn has higher elevations, for example. Queens has the most land area at risk when it comes to flooding. And we just started to see just a sneak peek of that in terms of what happened with Hurricane Ida last year. Global warming is here and the climate crisis is here. And our job is not, our responsibility right now is choosing what our response to it will be. It's going to require a lot of infrastructure investment. It's going to require resiliency in our subway systems. It's going to require changes in our housing and our zoning code to make basement dwellings safer. And I think that starts personally, I'm on a federal level, this is more of a city issue, but I will say I think that requires legalizing basement dwellings and making it a lot easier and safer for them to be habitable. So what we saw was that our district, our community, we lost 12 people in our community during Hurricane Ida. Nearly every single one of them were families, including children, that were trapped in sub-basement dwellings and in below-ground apartments that got rushed with water. And there were, they weren't up to code, so there might have only been one entrance and exit, and they could not get out. And so what we need to do is stop denying the reality of basement dwellings and accept that reality and make that reality safer, in addition to addressing our overall housing crisis and the cost of housing crisis. But that's a sidebar. We can get into that later. In terms of the Bronx has a profound
climate justice and environmental injustice issue. And that is really showing up in our lungs. It's showing up in a lot of places, but in the Bronx, environmental injustice and environmental racism is really showing up in our lungs. We have the highest incidence of asthma in the United States, period. And that contributes to 43 deaths per million people, just in terms of that issue alone. On top of that, you have a whole bunch of other transit injustice issues. And one of the reasons why we have this high incidence of asthma is because we have the Cross Bronx Expressway that cuts right through, and it's a heavy industrial zones, tend to be put next to poorer communities and communities with less political power and more disenfranchised communities. So kids are growing up around diesel trucking, they're growing up around industrial zones that are routinely breaking code, and it's showing up in astronomically high levels of asthma. And this dates back decades to back when Robert Moses decided to cut that artery through the Bronx. And so, you know, we've got a lot to work with here, but we have an enormous amount of opportunity that is possible for us in solving these problems. So let's go on to the next slide here. Now, in terms of state and local Green New Deals, after we introduced the Green New Deal resolution in 2019, what that did is that regardless of whether it was put to the floor for an immediate vote or not, whether it passed or not, the goal was to submit it. One of our primary goals was to submit it to the record so that it became an official document in the congressional record that cities and states could then pick up and adopt and start to implement locally. So what we have done and what we've been able to contribute to is an enormous amount of municipal, city, and state Green New Deals have already passed across the United States. We have seen at least 10 local ones in the United States, including right here in New York City, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, New Mexico, and more. And there have also been many more that have passed on the statewide level. In addition to that, in 2019, I headed to Copenhagen at a conference known as C40, which was a convening of the top 40 municipal and city mayors and governance structures across the world. And what we were able to do is convene top cities across the world, Japan, Paris, New York City, Los Angeles, beyond, to begin to commit to Green New Deal style drawdown goals. And this was honestly a strategy that started during the Trump administration, because we could say, listen, these big federal structures may be in their way, but they're not going to stop, and they can't stop cities and states and local municipalities for enacting what they can enact. So we can still draw down, even if you have people like Bolsonaro and Trump and Putin in charge. Like, we will not be deterred in getting this done. And we will not listen to folks that say that it's not possible, no matter what party they're in. Whether they're a Republican or Democrat, saying this isn't possible, we can't do it. When people tell us that, we say, watch us work. Watch us work. And so we're here to watch us work on the Green New Deal. We've had at least 10 municipalities pass in the United States at the World Mayors Summit. 94 cities globally embraced a global Green New Deal goals following our keynote address there. So we'll follow up. And lastly, this is an area that I'm really, really excited about. Last year, Congress started its first reintroduction of something known as community project funding. You all may remember this as a term called earmarks back in the day. Well, what this allowed members of Congress to do was that you were able to kind of earmark and designate specific federal funds and steer them to your individual community. Earmarks were phased out over 10 years ago, maybe 12, 13 years ago, but they were reintroduced last year with higher standards and more rigid protocols, because there was a little bit of funny business going on, apparently. So, but what we were able to do is reintroduce it with higher ethical standards and just more rigid protocols to get them passed. And we said, hey, this is a big opportunity here. And what we decided to do was author and help drive one of the first Green New Deal projects in the United States, right here in New York 14's congressional district. And so what we did was that we secured funding in our district on the Bronx half of the district. We have a lot of waterfront district in our community. On the Queens half, you have College Point, you have Astoria Ditmars, you have LaGuardia Airport, all of that. You have East Elmhurst, all of that is in our congressional district on the Queens side. On the Bronx side, you have Throgs Neck, City Island, Pelham Bay, all of that is also on the Bronx half of the district. And on the Bronx half of the district, we have SUNY Maritime, one of the only public maritime institutions in the United States. Almost any other place, if you want to get a maritime education, you have to go to a private institution, except here in our district. And so what we decided to do was that we worked with SUNY Maritime out there in Throgs Neck, and we secured funding for over 300 students to start a program, a jobs training program, where we are now going to train people in our community in the job skills necessary to learn how to build the underwater pylons necessary to put wind turbines on top for offshore wind. This is very sophisticated job work. We're talking about a program that involves people in our community learning how to, put on like that scuba gear to go down there with the tools necessary to build these things. But listen, these are the jobs of the future. And what we're able to do is make investments in our community so that instead of training people in skill sets that eventually are going to be phased out, we're not going to train people on new people on building out pipelines. We're going to train them on how to build pylons. And in doing that, we are creating job security right here in our community because we're not training people for jobs that are going to last 10 years. We're training people in jobs that are going to last a lifetime. And we're doing that right here in our community, and it was just announced about 2 weeks ago that we were able to secure it. So we're really, really excited about that. Oh, sorry. I think the virtual stream was having a hard time hearing me there, so I have to speak up. Behind the podium. Okay, sorry about that. Woo. I like to point. I don't like the podiums. They create too much distance between us. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So we're really, really excited about that. Last month, I also worked through a lot of the other earmarks that we were able to secure, so you can feel free to look that up. That information is available on our website. But this was the main climate-related one. We also were able to secure $3 million to build out a new OBGYN unit at Elmhurst Hospital and address our maternal mortality crisis, as well as $800,000 at Jacobi Hospital for a violence interruption program that we have already seen to reduce reoccurrence of incidents of violence and crime by over 50%. It's already proven to be more effective than any policing intervention that we have in the books at reducing crime and reducing incidents of violence. We're really excited about that. Now, in addition to the Green New Deal project that we secured right here at home, we also worked with a lot of other members of Congress as well to see if we could launch Green New Deal projects across the United States and use this as a conduit to help do that. And we're going to make the big announcement next week, but I'm giving you guys the scoop right here since this is our town hall. We've identified 79 Green New Deal projects across the United States. We'll be starting this year and in the next year. So we're really, really excited.
The mic needs to go on the stand.
Pardon?
The mic needs to go on the stand.
Now the mic needs to go on the stand. I'm getting more regulations by the minute here. Okay. So I'm we're really excited about this, and I believe that it's really just a testament to when people say that we can't, watch us work. Watch us work. What they're saying is that we can't do it the traditional way. Maybe, can you get 218 votes on the House floor on this specific resolution? If they may say we can't do that, it doesn't mean that we can't do the thing, period. And so we're going to find creative ways and alternatives to make sure that we can get this done. And that's really what we're really excited about and being able to accomplish today. So we've got that going on in terms of environmental justice for Astoria. Now I want us to kind of zoom back down to the micro. We know the big goals that we have. We have to draw down emissions. We have to address this in a way that's going to create millions of jobs, and not just any jobs, but good jobs, union jobs, prevailing wage jobs that have health care and actual benefits. And so we want to make sure that we're drawing down, we're meeting the scientific goals, we're decarbonizing, we're creating millions of jobs, and we're addressing environmental injustice in our communities. Because when there's a plant that needs to put in that's going to have a lot of emissions, that's going to give people, put people at risk of higher rates of cancer or of asthma, it's almost always working class communities, poor communities, and Black and brown communities that get the short shrift. And we have to make sure that we push back against that. So we had that win out in the Bronx, and then what this means right here in Astoria is that we were able to take on one of the biggest fossil fuel companies in the United States, NRG, and they were trying to open another peaker plant right here in Astoria. Now, what peaker plants are is that what they claim them to be is that they exist and they're not supposed to really be online except for times of peak activity. So in times where it's summer, everyone's got their AC on and there's like this excess demand, they build these peaker plants to burn fossil fuels to increase that energy production and meet that demand. We do not need to be building peaker plants in Astoria. We need to be building solar panels. We need to be building wind turbines. We need to be investing in hydropower in order to meet our energy needs, which, by the way, is cheaper because we are getting killed by Con Ed out here. We're getting killed. And every time that they say, thank you, every time that they say that they want to build a peaker plant, or every time you hear Con Ed or a fossil fuel company say, we're going to build these things to help you, what they're actually doing in proposing these fossil fuel projects is that they're trying to trap us in dependency on an energy source that is only going to get more expensive. It's only going to get more expensive. No matter what we do here, that is just the science of the issue. You know, we can try, we've got people like you have the president that's releasing the strategic reserve, all this other stuff. Even if you invest all this money in doing everything Republicans want, build out all build out new fossil fuel pipelines, increase production, fossil fuel infrastructure is only going to get more expensive because it is not a sustainable supply of energy, period. There's not enough, and it's finite, and it's only going to be less. And so it's only going to get more expensive. So what we need to be doing is making investments in cultivating infinite sources of energy, the sun, wind, hydropower, geothermal, etc., because that will only get cheaper. Solar, wind, renewable resources will only get cheaper over time. And so what we need to be doing is really helping people understand that these transitions are not going to only make us safer, not only are they going to protect our planet, but they're going to protect our pocket. Because this is a huge issue that is just crushing working families in our community. And the fact of the matter is that electric does not have to be more expensive. Right now, for example, one of the things that we had is, and this was one of the reasons why I objected so much to the separation of the bipartisan infrastructure plan from the Build Back Better Act. Because they were really designed to be puzzle pieces. And when you only design one of the puzzle pieces and you don't pass the other, we're missing the whole picture. So what happened with the bipartisan infrastructure bill is that we did get some critical investments in EV charging infrastructure, for example. There's a lot of money in there to build EV chargers, except how are you going to use an EV charger if you can't afford an EV car, an electric car? Build Back Better had up to $12,000 in subsidies to basically pay you to buy an electric car so that you can then use that EV charging infrastructure so that your electric vehicle will be cheaper, And we also want to expand that not just for them to be cars, but that for them to be electric bikes and other sorts of electrified infrastructure, so that you can actually use the infrastructure that's being built. Because what we're seeing right now is that when you just buy the chargers and keep the cars expensive, then electric infrastructure is only being built in wealthier areas. They are building the chargers around places where people can only afford EVs. So it's kind of like, you know, when you're wealthy, you end up saving a lot more money because that's been designed around you. So now wealthier communities are getting those solar investments, and we're getting stuck with dirty oil, gas, and coal. We're not going to allow that to happen. So when NRG announced that they were going to roll out a peaker plant, we said, hell no. And we partnered and worked with you all, because the community were the ones that first saw this and sounded the alarm and started to organize. And we worked with Assembly members Zohran Mamdani, Senator Janaris, who was just here, myself, along with climate and environmental activists and energy activists throughout Astoria. And we were able to successfully shut down the peaker plant right here in Astoria, Queens. And we're really excited about that, because in addition to, it's not just about what we're taking away, but it's about the investments that we put in. So the shutdown of that peaker plant was paired with our earmark to build out offshore wind and give jobs to our community in order to make that solution happen. So we're really happy about that. And so, you know, I think that is the overall update on what's going on. Oh, and I think the last thing is that we have a very exciting announcement as well. Again, I'm jumping the gun, I'm breaking all the news, but it's because you all get it first, right? So CNN gets it last, you guys get it first, okay? Now, the last piece of information that I want to share with you all today is that we're really, seems like we've truly finalized it this week, is that the Green New Deal is getting its first congressional hearing in history next Thursday. It will be held in the Oversight Committee, of which I am a member. We are extremely excited. It is including economists, environmental justice activists, scientists, you know, and experts across the country, including organizers and folks from right here in our backyard. And so we're extremely excited. For context, it took Medicare for All 10 years to get its first congressional hearing, if not a little bit longer than that. And just 3 years for a Green New Deal hearing, not bad, right? We're gonna try to continue to lower some of those lead times, but we're really excited. And it is absolutely and truly historic in order for us to get a hearing, our first congressional hearing of legislation of such magnitude. So we're very excited about this. It's happening next Thursday in Washington, D.C., and we're hoping to convene and bring forth a lot of folks together for that very momentous occasion. So that will be happening next week. And then lastly is just an announcement here, or that was up there, is that if you saw the slide before, we actually have a congressional art competition that happens every year for our high school students. And so we always just try, we've been making this announcement once a month, just letting people know, letting our students here in the community know, you can submit your art to the Congressional Art Competition. It is very prestigious. Winners are brought down to DC, and their artwork is hung up in the Capitol for the entire year. And it is, you know, formally presented, and it's just a true honor. And so if you are interested, or if you know a young person that is interested in submitting their artwork, the deadline is just in a few days, in 9 days, on April 29th. Have them contact their art teacher or email our team right here at ny14art@mail.house.gov for more details. But yeah, we'll wrap it up and we'll move on to the Q&A. Thank you all so much.
for your remarks, Congresswoman. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of the event. My colleagues will pass me question slips, and I will call on the constituent with the question, and then my colleague here, Jasper, will pass the microphone to you. Let's see. So the first one we have is for Jonah Gensler, who had a question about the Sunnyside Community Center and Woodside houses.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jonah Gensler. I work at Sunnyside Community Services.
Fabulous.
One of the programs that you funded through earmarks is a program.
Yes, I'm aware, and thank you all for doing that incredible work as well.
Thank you. One of the programs funded by you through the earmarks is in Woodside Houses. We have a Cornerstone Community Center. We thank you for that.
No, of course, thank you. Thank you for doing the work. Would you like to share with the community what you all are working on out there?
So we're working with over 60 young people, ensuring that we can stop the violence in the community and provide them alternatives and supports so they can thrive. But they can't thrive if they're flooded out.
Mm-hmm.
That center in Hurricane Ida, the water was up to here. And those children have been displaced. They're in area schools. We're trying to rebuild. But that rebuilding won't be effective if we don't have long-lasting solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And we're told that the streets need to be torn up and real solutions need to be found. How do we find the resources for that kind of infrastructure so that the kids in public housing can have the same rights that every kid in New York City should have?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's such a salient and important question, because one of the things that we've seen, sometimes every winter we go on the news and we'll see, especially how our neighbors that are living in NYCHA, whether it's Woodside Houses, Queensbridge, just over in the neighboring congressional district, how their boilers are out and how families are going without heat and hot water in the wintertime. Well, one of the things that happened in Woodside Houses and kind of around where Queensbridge Houses is that we actually got brand new boiler systems, and they were installed a week before Hurricane Ida hit. But they were installed underground because the boiler systems in NYCHA are in kind of these subterranean, kind of big basement style facilities underneath the building itself. So these brand new boiler systems were put in, and then Ida hit maybe a week or two later, and they were immediately flooded out. Brand new systems that were then totally flooded out. And then this winter, we had the same problem all over again. And so you're right in that if we cannot just build things back the way they were after a catastrophic storm, we have to build them back resiliently, and we have to build them back for the next 100 years, not for the last 100 years. And so when we talk about the resources that are necessary, there are some critical infrastructure funds that are in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But as I said, Build Back Better is the puzzle piece for it. And the bad news is, like, we're at this impasse right now, right? Where Joe Manchin's sitting on it in the Senate. And the things that are his red line, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Don't even get me started, okay? The child tax credit is literally what his red line is. He believes that the child tax credit is unacceptable to him. But the good news is that what we were able to successfully fight for last year to be put in Build Back Better, that passed the House, which is a huge hurdle, is all $40 billion in capital needs for NYCHA. It's in Build Back Better. And we fought for it, and we got it secured, and we got certain provisions and fought for a specific attunement and consideration of climate infrastructure needs in our public housing systems. But one of the big fights that we need to have, and that we had and that we won with BBB, is finally getting people to realize that housing is infrastructure. Housing is infrastructure. It's just as critical physical infrastructure as our roads and our bridges. Schools are infrastructure. These buildings are public facilities. And they are infrastructure. And by the way, they're not just like for our kids or for our families that use them, but we should also be thinking about public facilities like schools. We need to be considering them with climate in mind, which means this building needs to be prepared in case there's a disaster that our community can come here for refuge. It needs to be built like that. That's what we're talking about with resiliency. So when it comes to resources, we've got those initial resources in BBB. Now what we need to do is figure out what is amenable, how we can get some of these resources passed while we implement the existing resources that were deployed in the bipartisan infrastructure plan, which we're already starting to do, and making sure that we conduct oversight with how that is conducted, because it's not enough just to move a pot of money from one place to another. We need to make sure that that money is distributed responsibly and that ethically and with full accountability and transparency to the people.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The next question we have is for Argenia Rojas, who has a question on the current administration.
Close enough. It's not a common name, so don't worry.
But what is your name?
Argenis.
Argenis?
Argenis.
Argenis.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Congresswoman, for hosting the town hall. My question is with respect to, as Mabel alluded to, the Biden administration, right? And I don't ask this with the intent of getting you into any troubled waters.
I got enough, so what's another one?
So like with the climate provisions in BBB failing, right? Plus we have the situation with the invasion of Ukraine, autocrats controlling essentially all of the oil producing countries that are in the world. Why do you think that the administration isn't taking this opportunity to accelerate sort of clean energy technologies or battery production, et cetera? And instead, it seems like they're succumbing to pressure from Manchin, the GOP, media even, to just focus on increasing domestic oil production. And it seems like the green vision is totally taking a back seat. So why do you think that is?
Thank you. I mean, it's politics, right? So let's explain. I think, divulge with you the politics of the situation. Now, this is with the disclaimer that this is just how I see things. People can see things in a completely different way. Both of those things could be very perfectly legitimate. You know, you see the same set of facts and may come to different conclusions. So I'm not going to tell you this is how it is for sure, but I will tell you this is how I see the situation. I see the situation is that these decisions are political decisions. There is an enormous amount of political pressure by, yes, media, and political pressure around gas prices. And media and politicians and frankly fossil fuel lobbyists take a lot of advantage over the fact that people don't really know what makes gas expensive or fluctuate in price. And so there's this kind of general weird American thing that we have, that it's like we somehow think that who we vote for determines like what the price of gas is, which does not apply anywhere else in the world, you know, like, and here's the real thing is like the price of your milk goes up, you know, price of anything else you have goes up. People just kind of say, man, like, that's it, I guess. But the price of gas goes up and they're like, man, I voted for the wrong guy. And it's like, what? So it's not to say that those things aren't politically connected, but just in, I think, a different way. When we look at inflation, not just when it comes to gas, but when it comes to agricultural products, when it comes to, you know, food, all of it, a lot of it has to do with the concentration of capital and the concentration and like development of oligopolies in the industries that we rely on the most. I sit on the Select Committee for Economic Inequality, and I mean, you'd be shocked. 4 companies are responsible for almost 50% of all food products, you know, all meat processing in the United States. So at that point, you know, all of these companies are blaming increased costs for rising prices, but the math does not add up. When you actually look at the increased costs and inputs of what's going on last year with supply chain issues, wage increases, et cetera, you're really looking at inflation of like maybe 3%, maybe a little bit more, which is higher than normal. Normal is around 2.2%. You will see inflation when you look at just the costs around 3%, maybe a little bit more. What we're actually seeing is inflation 6, 7, 8, 9%. That is corporate greed, 100%. That's really what we're seeing in terms of the math not adding up. And they're taking advantage of this moment. Fossil fuel companies, when there is a phenomenon when it comes to gas and what you're paying at the pump, it's that it goes up like a rocket and down like a feather. So yeah, costs went up due to certain supply constrictions around the conflict in Ukraine. But when we released the strategic oil supply, when other companies, when we're able to secure gas reserves from other places, that price is not going down as quickly as it went up and as quickly as those actions were taken. So they go up like a rocket and down like a feather because Wall Street is patting its pocket right now. And so, you know, when we talk about why the Biden administration is making the decisions that it's making, I think there's a couple of things. One, it's people taking advantage of the fact that gas prices going up. There's this like political phenomenon of people blaming the president in terms of the price of gas, instead of blaming the companies that are setting the price of gas. So there's that. That creates a window of opportunity, because when people are mad at the president, that creates a window of opportunity where Republicans and pro-fossil fuel, because it's not just Republicans, there are fossil fuel Democrats. And that creates a window of opportunity for them to add pressure and to say, you know, unleash it all, increase production and supply. And that's why it's really important that people are educated on how our energy can actually work. Because we've been tricked into believing that solar and wind and hydropower are gonna take like 30 years to build out. And it could not be further from the truth. You know, if you think about it in terms of your own home, the actual time, budget and the money aside, but let's say assuming you have the money, the amount of time it takes to install solar panels on your roof, not that long, not that long. So where we play a role is that we can make investments to reduce the costs of solar. In addition to that, we can also help subsidize technologies, because here's the thing, gas is subsidized, billions and billions of dollars. So subsidies are not a dirty word. People just only make them a dirty word when they're actually subsidizing renewable and clean energy. And so one of the things that we can do as well is that even if your home still is on gas, you can transition to far more efficient devices like heat pumps that take up just a fraction of the oil and gas that you're using to heat up your home in the same exact way. So, you know, one of the things that we've called on the president to do is to pursue a series of executive actions, including invoking the Defense Production Act, which is the same act that we use to develop vaccines, the same act that we use to develop COVID tests in record time and develop 40 million COVID tests, to also develop masks and PPE, to use the Defense Production Act, not just for the scientific and just global crisis of COVID, but to also use it for the climate crisis. We need to be using the Defense Production Act right now to be developing heat pumps for people to buy at a reduced cost, solar panels, and the things that are needed for other forms of clean and renewable energy. But in terms of why he's doing that, I would say it's the politics of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our ASL interpreter, Kat, asked that you slow down a little bit.
Thank you, sorry. And thank you, Kat, it's Kat, right? Yeah. Thank you, Kat, for your interpretation for us.
Our next question is from Fardeen Oishik, who has a question on electronic waste.
Hey, so I work in the energy and infrastructure industry, and so I think solar is amazing, and I've looked into it a lot. I think the Green New Deal is setting the foundations for solar and wind and renewable energy into the future, and you know, I hope there's a strong foundation that we build upon. So one of my concerns is solar panels, let's say they have a lifespan of 25 to 30 years. How do we, at the federal level, make companies play by their rules and make sure electronic waste isn't shipped to Asia or Africa, where they create a whole bunch of health issues among kids, and like third world countries are kind of forced to clean up after us?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. And this is an excellent question as well, because one of the things that we also need to contend with is the fact that energy use does create waste, including renewable energy. And so when it comes to batteries, we have the mining of lithium that is required in order to source EV batteries and other sorts of energy storage batteries. And you have the issue of e-waste with solar panels and even, it's not e-waste, but also when we dispense of wind turbines. A lot of wind turbines that have been produced are actually non-recyclable. And so we have this issue of waste at the end of life for some of these renewable sources. So I think there's a couple of things to say. One is that there is just the overall disclaimer that none of these things have zero impact, zero environmental impact. What is so urgent about renewables is that they do not emit carbon or methane or greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to the warming of our planet. But there still is environmental concerns with respect to mining and the sourcing of the raw materials needed in order to generate solar panels. And that goes for any sort of material item that we use, whether it's fast fashion, whether it's food. Whenever we are consuming something, it has to come from somewhere. And we have to make sure that it's both at its origin point and at its end point done in as sustainably and ethically a manner possible. When it comes to solar panels and e-waste, the first thing that I think is necessary is making investments in the R&D to make sure that solar panels are able to last longer and be more efficient, so that we're not tossing them out every X years. But the good news is that we're making a lot of progress in that issue. When solar panels were kind of initially starting to become commercially available, a lot of them had 10-year lifespans. Now they have 25, 30-year lifespans. But now what we need to do is to continue to make the investments necessary so that solar panels can last a lifetime, and that the density of the cells within a solar panel can be such that you can also generate a lot more power in a much smaller footprint of a panel. And we are making a lot of progress in terms of that as well. So maybe 10, 15 years ago, if you covered your roof in solar panels, you would only get so much energy from it. Now, if you cover your roof in that same area of solar panels, you can generate a lot more energy that can also last your home a lot longer on that same square footage. So I think there's a couple of things we need to do. One of the things that I've advocated for, I was in Glasgow for COP26, just last November. I went there with the U.S. delegation with Speaker Pelosi, and we were working with a lot of other delegations from around the world. And one of the things that we've really fought for, and that they are fighting for, that delegations from really all over the world, whether it's South Asia, Latin America, indigenous communities around the world, that they're fighting for is something known as loss and damages, which is essentially our way, or their proposed way, of addressing this basic injustice. Developed countries are disproportionately contributing to the climate crisis. The amount of emissions per person, and the very bulk of our emissions are coming from the United States, Europe, and really kind of the wealthy world, is responsible for the bulk of emissions that have already been emitted. Then you have the issue of developing countries whose economies are rapidly accelerating, and they're basically going to the United States and saying, well, you guys got to burn fossil fuels to high heaven in order to develop your economy. Why can't we do that? And those are folks that are in the boat like China, India, Brazil, etc. And then you have pretty much everybody else. And you have places like Indonesia, Bangladesh, as well as farming communities in Latin America that are really experiencing the ravages through either drought or through flooding, saying, this is all of your guys' fault, but we are experiencing the bulk of the harm and the damage, because where sea rise is predicted to flood out the most is actually in countries that have contributed to carbon emissions the least. And so at C40, there's a current kind of global pact and global discussion and debate happening, facilitated by the UN, saying the United States, the UK, and a lot of other, the EU, they need to essentially commit to a transfer of wealth to help these other communities and other countries leapfrog their technologies so that they don't have to go through the fossil fuel phase and wait to be wealthy in order to transition to renewables. So I think including in the loss and damages is not just investments in transitions of energy, but investments in remediating injustices, whether it's through e-waste, illegal dumping, or whether it's through a lot of other, raising of indigenous lands, raising of land in general that's usually extracted and used for consumption in the wealthy world, like, with logging, for example. So I think we need to really look at our foreign policy and approach and change and shift our foreign policy to not just be militarily and defense-based, but to also be climate defense-based and diplomatically based. And that right there, I think, is really where we're going to have to push. And we need to push internally, because I'll tell you, the United States doesn't want to do that. We've been there, we've been in these rooms. They don't want to do it. And we have to do it. We have to do it. We have to do it domestically, and we have to do it abroad as well.
Thank you so much. Next, we have William Cabeza, who has a question on immigration.
Thank you for this opportunity. And I wrote this question before I came here, so bear with me and forgive me for if it seems like I'm trying to take away from your theme and your message.
No.
Sorry, I wrote, one of the biggest fears for Democrats is losing seats in the upcoming midterm elections. So I'm arguing due to the left being out of touch with its constituents. As someone who follows political news and have watched many of your town halls, I wonder if, with all due respect, we have lost sight of what's important to the constituents. I have lived in New York for 28 years, and out of all the concerns and problems I've heard voiced from my friends and from my coworkers, climate change is not at the top of their list. And while I consider it a worthy and noble cause for which to fight for, I wonder if political capital is being spent on an agenda at the expense of more pressing issues. One issue that should be addressed, for instance, in this case, is immigration reform. New York City is home to several million immigrants and over 500,000 undocumented immigrants. Why aren't we talking about immigration reform anymore? When this meeting is over in the next several minutes and everyone goes back to their respective houses and lives, the undocumented community will go back to their lives, except it is a life in fear of deportation, uncertainty of the future, going back to working odd jobs in construction, working in unsafe working environments, and barely making enough to make ends meet. I myself am a DACA recipient, a former first responder, and a current healthcare worker. But I have no path to citizenship. I'm unable to follow my dreams of joining the military, of joining law enforcement, or even being able to travel outside the country because I don't have citizenship. I ask again, why isn't immigration reform at the forefront of our conversation? And how are you using your platform to present a more informed narrative of an immigrant's plight and using your platform to advance pro-immigrant reforms?
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, so, I mean, that was incredible. And I got your name correctly, William, right? William, thank you for bringing this up, and thank you for your service to our community in so many different ways, as you had listed. And, I think that this is the issue. And I do want to say, first and foremost, when it comes to immigration, it is the #1 issue that we are called about in our office. It's the #1 source of our casework, and it forms and informs our legislative agenda. Now, that doesn't change the fact that the Senate is sitting on this. And it doesn't change the fact that, I could tell you all these things that we're doing. It doesn't change the fact that you are still DACA. And that is ultimately, and that your family, if you have family here with you, if your parents are here with you, if they happen to be undocumented or friends or whomever, what we do, and I will tell you these things, but none of those things change the fact and the status that so many people in our community are undocumented. And that is part of a political crisis and a political impasse. Now, I think there's a couple of things. So, because you listed a lot, so forgive me if I'm gonna say a lot. But one thing that I try to say is that I think it's really important that we reject a scarcity mindset, that our issues are ranked and that something coming first is at the cost of us working on something else. Sometimes, and in certain issues and in certain areas, you know, things like that may apply. But our community is so interwoven and these issues are so interconnected that they can't be separated. They can't be prioritized one over another. And I'll give you a perfect example. What is happening in climate is driving migration, especially at our southern border. Because of what the United States has done in just burning fossil fuels unfettered, our communities in Honduras, in Chile, in Peru, in Colombia, we had one example is that in the last defense spending bill, I introduced several amendments to block U.S. funds from fumigating coca leaves and coca fields, which are really, truly harming physically and economically indigenous peoples out in Colombia. But then also what's happening is that the droughts and the impact of the climate crisis is taking communities that have been settled in places for thousands of years, who have been self-sustaining. They can no longer grow their own food. And they've been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so what this is doing is that it is driving the conflicts over resources, conflicts over water, the lack of arable land due to the climate crisis is part of, we have to look at why people are moving. And it's due to the fact that we have an imperious history of foreign policy in the United States that fuels regime change, and that has created decades of social and political instability and violence in Latin America. And climate change is also forcing people to leave ancestral lands that they have never, they've never known any other place. And so when we think about, it's just one example of how these priorities are not competing. And so, I do want to say every month we have a theme. This just happened to be this month's theme. Immigration was our theme, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago or a couple of months ago. We dealt with, not that we dealt with it, but we covered it several months ago. But all that is to say is, how are we making a priority here? Your question is, what do we do in our office and in our power? One is that we're constantly bringing up the issue, and we're constantly talking about inclusion and a path to citizenship for undocumented people in every issue area. So in climate, we're addressing migration and climate. When it comes to what happened even with Hurricane Ida, or actually let's start with COVID. What happened in COVID was that we started seeing, because I represent and take the responsibility of representing our community here, and this is an immigrant community. New York's 14th congressional district, they just did redistricting, so they don't have the new census data, but our last census data, this community is 49% immigrant. 49%. And that doesn't even include first generation. When you include people who are first gen and immigrant, it's probably like 70% of our community. This is the number one issue that is affecting us, our congressional district. And so what happened was that when COVID first hit, we started seeing that COVID was not affecting all of us equally. Our deliveristas, our frontline workers, our janitorial staff, people who did not have the luxury to work from home were getting sick more. And that meant that they were disproportionately immigrants that were getting sick, disproportionately poor people, disproportionately working class people, all of those folks were getting sick more. And so what we decided to do, at least in the short term, was that we started seeing this really early, because this is our home, this is our backyard. And at the outbreak of the pandemic, out of the top 10 zip codes in the United States that were hit by COVID, 5 of them were right here in our district, not even New York City, here. And so we have to work with Elmhurst Hospital, because thank God we have the public institution that is Elmhurst Hospital that has committed to not checking people for their documented status in order to receive full health care. And the same health care, we've worked overtime, the same health care that we have at Elmhurst Hospital, the same health care they'll give to a wealthy person, they will give to an undocumented poor person. And we're one of the only places in the world where that happens. And so what we decided to do was that we engaged in a FEMA funeral assistance program, because I lost my dad when I was 18. And I know that when a loved one dies, because my mom, she cleans houses. You know, I grew up the daughter of a domestic worker in a family that understands like elements of that experience. And so I know that when you have a sudden loss in your family, that also, on top of a tremendous emotional and spiritual and mental cost, comes a tremendous financial cost. Burying your loved ones can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And in our community, all the people that were dying, many of them had to be repatriated to their ancestral lands, back to Colombia, to Bangladesh, to India, on top of all of the tragedy that was going on. So what this means is that it started, when you take that times tens of thousands of people, you actually start having a macroeconomic trend where not only were working class people getting sick more, but we're talking about a massive wealth issue, because when you lose 2 people in your family and you have to put them to rest, that's a down payment for a house right there. And that's a whole other generation that you're put behind financially. So what we decided to do right away was to author a FEMA funeral assistance program. And this is where, I'm sorry for all the backstory, but this is where I'm actually like, I had to set it up to answer your full question, okay? The FEMA funeral assistance program. What we did was that in hearing that feedback from community organizers and folks saying this is going to be a problem, I authored a FEMA funeral assistance program where the federal government, and I was able to put it in the American Rescue Plan, which was passed by the House, the Senate, and signed by the President, where we created a FEMA funeral assistance program where any person in the United States who had a loved one who passed away from COVID, that they would get 100% of their funeral costs reimbursed by the federal government, regardless of your status, your housing status, your documentation status, your income status. It is not means tested. There's no questions. And it's based on the principle that we're in this together and we need to get out of this together. And we're not going to ask your questions because we need to start drafting policy that acknowledges that everyone here contributes. And let's not even start talking about tax day, because as we know, our undocumented brothers and sisters pay billions of dollars in taxes every single year, financing Medicare, Medicaid, financing all our public infrastructure. Our undocumented community and immigrants in the United States, they contribute to our society financially more than Facebook does, more than GE does, more than Wall Street does. And we need to start, and with that FEMA program, we established a precedent, an initial precedent, where we say you contribute to this society, you benefit from this society. And that's the principle that we have started to advocate for, so that, yes, we continue to fight for a path to citizenship, I continue to wail on Manchin every time that I get, but also to say, yes, we're gonna fight for citizenship, but let's also revisit what it means to be undocumented and the indignities of being undocumented in the United States. Because it should not, even if we have a path to citizenship, even if you have people, there's always gonna be, for one reason or another, some person who may be undocumented for whatever reason, for whatever time. That person should not be denied health care. That person should not be denied an education. That person should not be denied full participation in our society because they contribute to it. And so it's really about the dual approach. Because you know what? You're right. When it comes to the politics of it, and, you know, I can't talk about campaigning too much here because this is not a campaign event, but what I will say is that the politics of it is that, yeah, you know, one of the messages that I continue to send to the party, to their chagrin, and they don't always like me for it, and, you know, but, you know, whatever, I'm not the most popular person in DC sometimes, but it's because I say we can't take our communities for granted. We can't take them for granted. And right now, we are. With the lack of student loan forgiveness, with the lack of movement on immigration, with the lack of movement on voting rights and civil rights, and at the end of the day, you don't want to hear from me, I'm trying, you want to hear we're getting it done, okay? And like, that's really frustrating for me, not you. What's really frustrating to me is that we need to get it done, and there's one dude in the Senate who's just sitting on it for, ¿para qué? I don't know. Because his reason changes every other week and he doesn't have consistency in his logic. And, you know, speaking on why Biden is taking this tack, for some reason, for some people, institutions of power respond to them by saying, oh, if we're just nice enough, he'll come along. Si lo noña, he'll come. If I make them mad, it's like the fires of hell rain down on me. Right? So I know that this party leadership has it in them to turn the screws. And that's why I'm very frustrated, because I know they're choosing not to turn the screws on him. ¿Por qué? When civil rights, climate, immigration, student loans, all of it is on the line, including our democracy, because there is the political reality where if we don't deliver, we shouldn't be surprised when people aren't so enthused, right? And then if we lose the House, this is no joke. January 6th was a trial run. And a lot of people don't seem to understand that. It was a trial run. And they're going to come back. And they win the House. Here's the thing, the technicality of what happened on January 6th. The only reason it wasn't worse was because Democrats had the House and they didn't have the votes in the House. If they take the House, then they have the votes to not authorize and legitimize the presidential election, whatever the results are. And so this is very serious. And this is the intertwining of all of our issues. And so, you know, one thing that I can give as a commitment is that we intertwine it in every single issue. We continue to champion and elevate it. We work very closely with our direct grassroots organizations, not the DC ones, not the little think tanks down there, but we work with NICE, we work with DRUM, we work with Make the Road right here so that we can form our strategy in community. And one thing that you can also know that we continue to say is that our office, you can 100% guarantee that it's a refuge. We've had over 1,000 caseworkers come in. We reunite families. We've gotten people off of planes that ICE was trying to deport. They were on the plane. We've gotten them off. We've been able to reunite people that were, and get them out of ICE detention. We've been able to get people green cards when their applications have been lost. We've been able to get people visas. And so my commitment to you is that no matter what is happening, you know, we're gonna fight everything we can on the macro level. But even if things feel stuck on the macro level, my commitment and my promise is on the micro level. This is our investment. That you call our office, we have special protocols too. You call our office, we do not disclose anyone's documented status when someone reaches out to us for help. Not one, because we protect our community, because we've seen what's happened and we saw the way the Trump administration manipulated a lot of that. And that's what happened with the census too. They were trying to draft the census to identify who was undocumented and cross-check, and we prevented them from doing that. And so I just want you to know that in every single other issue, we're making it an immigration issue as well, on top of the overall path to citizenship. Because it's about securing the path to citizenship, but it's also about ending the indignity of being undocumented in America. Thank you.
Our final question is from Pat Carozzo on solar rooftops.
Sorry.
So inadequate at this point. It seems so.
No, it all is important. It all matters.
It is all important, and I am, like you, concerned about using more solar. And I've spoken to my building about it several times. I went down to a meeting in the city with city council people and talked to them about it. They actually looked at our roof and suggested we get some work done, which the city then required. But I'm concerned that, I think if we all got together in my little community, there'd be plenty more people interested in solar.
Yeah.
And we could do it collectively. But I'm just wondering how much support there is for that, actually, if it's happening yet.
Yeah, I think that there is, and what you're actually speaking to hints to another reason why some of these big energy companies are so scared. Because when you rely, or when our community relies on fossil fuels, you have to be hooked up to a centralized system. You have to be hooked up to a centralized grid. You need to have basically that input where oil or gas does get funneled into your home. And one of the lessons that we actually saw after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is that a lot of people, because they were so traumatized, because there were some communities that didn't get power for over a year. Over a year, yeah. And yes, and so there were communities that couldn't even get their electricity rehooked up for over a year after Maria. And so people started switching to solar, not just because they thought it was the right thing to do, but because they didn't feel like they could trust being hooked into a centralized system and for another storm to take it out again. And so what we actually started to see in Puerto Rico is that communities started to develop something known as solar cooperatives. And what they are kind of like decentralized community energy systems. And sometimes they're hooked up to the grid and they're just used as a backup. Sometimes they're used just as a huge part of their energy mix. But basically, what you're able to do in some of these solar cooperatives is that you get a solar panel, your neighbor might get a solar panel, and what you also do is get batteries. So you can get large-scale batteries, and like if you're kind of a DIYer, I don't recommend you do this. This is not professional advice. I'm not an electrician. But what you can do, and what some people do, is that they actually buy a bunch of car batteries. And you can assemble them and hook them up in a way, again, I don't advise it, but where it can store the energy that is generated by your solar. Because the thing about solar is that you get the energy that panel is generating, but it goes straight to your home. And so if you're not using that energy in that given moment, it just kind of either goes right back into the grid or it kind of goes to waste. But you can install a battery system in your home that stores the solar. It's a little, it's a little lower priority in New York, but in a place like Puerto Rico with so much sun, there's a lot of use in storing a lot of it. And so what happens is that either at night, any excess can be used, or if your neighbor's house goes out, or if your neighbor's using a little bit more electricity than normal, if they're working on a project or something like that, you can hook your two homes together. And you're kind of like borrowing a cup of sugar and giving a cup of sugar, and your panels just do that and even it out. And the beauty of doing that is that, you can do it with just a neighbor. And also all of us can kind of do it. We're now at a place where you can actually buy just one panel and hang it up on your window. And that just charges your phone for the day. Like, they're very small baby steps, and then there are really, really big steps. But, pardon?
What about the electricity? Like, can you put a panel in your apartment building and hook it up?
Yeah, and so, yeah, so, I think this is the part of the conversations that we're starting to have, because part of the Green New Deal for New York City that was passed was not just regulations around roofing. One of those things is like, new buildings are starting to have white painted roofs because that can reflect the sun back out. It decreases how hot it can get here in the summertime. But also if you put solar there, a lot of buildings are starting to do that because gas is just getting too expensive. It's just like, the good thing is that we're now at a point where the costs are getting down to a level where you don't have to just make the good for the world argument. You can win the fact that it's cheaper in that argument too. So in terms of like, do people really want this? I do think people want it. We as a city are pioneering and are going to have to continue to pioneer how that works on a multi-unit building and on like a much larger unit building, but also right here in Astoria and in other communities in East Elmhurst, you have like single or two family homes where this can start to be really reasonable. And the thing is that you take a block, even if you take one block or you take 5 houses and you put solar on those 5 houses and you put batteries on those 5 houses and then you link those 5 houses, your Con Ed bill is not going to be hundreds of dollars. And that's what they don't want. To the point that a lot of fossil fuel companies are they're lobbying state assemblies to introduce taxes on solar to make solar more expensive than fossil fuels at the end of the day. And so there's a lot of different levels to this fight. I do think that there's a lot of ways that we can do it. I think, community project funds is a really great opportunity for us to pilot and test these ideas. Because a lot of times when it comes to federal legislation, people feel a little hesitant about funding these huge projects that have never been tried before. But if we can earmark some of these funds, if we have a nonprofit organization or if we have a grassroots community organization that's willing to take this on, and we can develop, potentially a plan, this is an example where if it's designed correctly and appropriately, it could be eligible for community project funds. That pilot works, and then if you just need one block. Not even a whole block, you just need half a block. And if you can make it half a block, then we can scale it up. So, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, I know how to work with my hands.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can teach us because I need to learn too. So, but one of the things I would say is if you're interested in that, Google search, your piece of homework to take home is Community Solar Cooperative. And you can take that home and you can learn a lot more about how they're structured. And the good thing is that you don't need anyone's permission. I didn't tell you anything, but. All right, thank you all so much. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.